just cavity concoctions.
It's most likely that if you've been on the internet for a while, you'd likely recognize this aesthetic. These backgrounds used in lo-fi beats and study compilations, mixes of neon pink, green and blue sunsets and intergalactic themed aspects of everyday life, the grainy VHS style filters overlapping anime and cartoon characters. This statue in particular, I don't know where that comes from, but I would honestly be very surprised to hear that you haven't seen any variation of this aesthetic, even if you've only been online for like a year. It's come to be extremely popular and honestly very influential to the internet as a whole, and for some reason it refuses to die out. I don't know how or why, but every few years it just manages to reincarnate itself to fit different trends and styles as the years go by. It's honestly a timeless aesthetic. It's come and gone in many forms over the last 15 years, most recognizably in the form of ᴄᴇ괱ᴜᴜ, or ᴄᴇ괱ᴜᴜ, I don't know how you say it, I don't care. But this aesthetic that arose on TikTok during like mid-2024, which we'll get into later, don't worry, we'll talk about that later. But like most genres, to understand Vaporwave, we often have to look back at its predecessors in order to find out what it actually is, in order to better understand it and where it comes from as a whole. To be able to fit Vaporwave into the bigger picture of the internet, we're gonna have to go back and look at chillwave. Chillwave was a genre that emerged in the United States during the late 2000s, circa 2008, 2009, we don't really know though, from artists independently sharing music online through apps like MySpace, Bandcamp and SoundCloud. And because it emerged pretty much completely online, it wasn't tied to any cities or subcultures or physical areas. Seeing as it was developed, listened to and distributed pretty much entirely on social media, we know it somewhat originated in the United States, but the genre itself is tied more to the online world rather than a physical place or area. Very unlike a lot of music genres. But what exactly is it? Okay, well, the best way of describing early chillwave is basically as lo-fi pop music, which you would expect to think is from the 80s and the early 2000s at the same time. It's supposed to sort of replicate a lost media, rediscovered type of aesthetic of the 80s, but with some of these independent artists obviously being influenced by the 2000s music at the time, they couldn't help but sound like it, even if it's just a little bit. But for the main part, it does lean more into the 80s aspect. It's very atmospheric and includes a lot of grainy, textured synthesizers to make it sound nostalgic, and it gives it an almost vintage feel at the same time. But it's still important to note that at this point, the genre still hasn't fully developed yet. So the sounds between these two examples, and honestly, many songs during the early ages of chillwave, vary pretty widely. And like most underground or smaller subgenres of music, it attempted to diverge from the more commercialized modern sound of music at the time. And with help of other online spaces like MySpace and YouTube having discovered the sound, users helped develop a nostalgic and VHS aesthetic to accompany the vibes of the music through making music videos and visualizers and stuff. By giving these songs the visuals to match the aesthetic, it was made more intimate in a way, being able to match the sound to a vibe and indulge in the feeling that it would give the user. And these themes of escapism and dreamy, nostalgic atmosphere is eventually what defined chillwave as a genre, and it would eventually start developing into vaporwave. Now, you could argue that chillwave and vaporwave is what helped boost the lo-fi sound into the online mainstream, making the lo-fi aesthetic what it is today. What vaporwave essentially did is expanded upon this aura of dreaminess and escapism by not only slowing the music down, but also through releasing songs with cryptic, nonsensical, and oftentimes like anonymous artist names, like Macintosh Plus, or Saint Pepsi. What does that even mean? But a key figure in the production of the vaporwave style was a man named Daniel Lopatin. He went on to produce the album Echo Jams Volume 1 by Chuck Person, and this went on to be one of the most influential works in the foundation of the vaporwave sound, and also popularized vaporwave to a grander audience, as at this point it was still extremely underground. The entire album is basically a compilation of slowed, chopped and looped sounds from 80s pop music, laid in distortion, echo and reverb to give it a sort of dreamlike, surreal effect. It's super cool. And the fact that this got popular while it was only released on cassette That's impressive, dude. And it probably added to the vintage feel and underground aesthetic that Vaporwave basically thrived on. Which leads me to why this album played such a key role in defining what Vaporwave stood for. Because it laid the foundations for the glitchy, loopy structure of the genre, which at its core was used to not just physically, but also mentally deconstruct this idea of perfectly produced, clean, mainstream, modern corporate pop music, which I'll talk about later. And not just that, but the sound of Vaporwave itself was also pushed by its use in memes, like the aesthetic meme spreads and the Windows 95 startup memes.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
Like, you probably recognize this song, right? You most likely do. Like, this has got to be in the top 5 internet songs of all time. This is like an absolute internet classic. I love it. Vaporwave actually gained so much popularity within this meme culture that it started developing ironically. Okay, well, this ironic development isn't actually completely to do with the memes, but like, we'll get to that. What I mean by ironically is that a lot of the aesthetics derive from old computers and office working life, which on a surface level is for the aesthetic. But because we're intellectuals here on the Chest Cavity channel, come on, we gotta go in depth. I mean, come on. If you like to go deep, pause. If you like your music to go deep, click that subscribe, bro, because we're going so deep. Basically, a key feature of Vaporwave are themes of escapism and irony, as you already know, and obviously the anti-mainstream sentiment that came along with earlier producers of the genre pushed this ironic sense. They not only used the grainy, dreamy sounds for the theme of escaping reality, but also escaping the current state of mainstream pop, where everything had to be perfect and clean and masterfully mixed, by not taking itself too seriously in terms of production, and in fact intentionally adding grain and distortion for a lower quality effect. I guess that this was its own little way of rebelling against the modern mainstream sound of pop. And because of this, I feel that you could argue that a lot of these aesthetics and imagery used to do with the 80s offices, computers, and working life was ironic, in a sense. Because although on a surface level, this looks beautiful, it's used more ironically. They almost want to frame it as something dystopian, like something from the 80s that would romanticize the future. Another ironic sample would be the fact that it would sample old jingles and American and Japanese theme songs from the 80s to indulge in the meme and anime culture from what it was gaining so much traction. And as you can probably tell from the variety of the clips that I've shown you, it seems like it was centered around playing with old samples and slowing down 80s songs, playing with aesthetics and aspects of internet culture rather than actually developing as a genre. And because of this popularity within social media and the vibe it brought with it, it was infectious in whatever app it touched. Especially on YouTube, I don't know why, but it was really popular with commentary YouTubers like Leafy is Here, Memulus, and Pyrocynical, where they sampled old Vaporwave songs for their intros and outros and background music and whatever. And eventually this Vaporwave aesthetic became a staple for commentary on YouTube, which if you weren't on the internet during like the mid 2010s for commentary YouTube, first of all, it's probably past your bedtime, so you should probably switch off the video. But also, you probably know how influential and how infectious commentary on YouTube was, which is I think what honestly helped aid in the Vaporwave aesthetic. Because despite their relatively small size compared to like a lot of big YouTubers at the time, everyone knew who Leafy is Here was, okay? Everyone knew who Pyrocynical was, and everyone recognized this sound. Likely without even knowing where it came from or caring. Many people really fucked with the aesthetic that they had, and along with commentary as a whole, went on to influence the whole of the internet, despite how relatively small these were compared to other YouTubers. And the visuals of this genre eventually started to expand beyond music, into places where the sound actually couldn't reach. It went even more visual, and Vaporwave solidified itself as an aesthetic rather than a music genre by moving into things like graphic design and fashion. We can see that Vaporwave was starting to influence all corners of the media, and pretty much no one knew what Vaporwave was. It's most likely that even if you're very young, you've lived through or experienced some form of the Vaporwave aesthetic, especially because of how much it's transformed over the years. Like, I can so vividly remember this era in like 2019 to 2022, where it was like the peak anime profile picture time on like Discord and TikTok, and everyone at one point had like a grainy purple profile picture from like an old anime, you know what I'm talking about. I know you had that, it wasn't just me, I'm not alone on this one. Like an old grainy anime from like Akira or Evangelion or something. Or Bart Simpson for some reason. I don't know how. Don't ask me how Bart Simpson has managed to sneak his way into all this. I don't know how his little yellow grubby hands has done that. I have no idea how he keeps popping up as like a prominent figure in internet cultures and aesthetics. Like, who is doing this? Who took their time out of their day to make this? This is pissing me off. I'm moving on. But I do know that with the vaporwave aesthetic now being probably more popular than the original music it derives from, it's bound to change. With time and with the introduction of new trends and aesthetics, it's bound to change. And with it being such a timeless aesthetic, we're seeing its changes as we speak. Overall, I would say that the aesthetic more than anything has had key roles in shaping the vibes of all kinds of eras on the internet. So it's kind of like the troll phase in some aspect, like where it doesn't really die out, it just sort of evolves. It evolves to fit the current online trends at the time. And I can guarantee that without vaporwave, the internet wouldn't be as it is today. But if you've made it this far, be sure to check out my other music related videos if you enjoyed this video. I don't just post about music, you know, I tend to post whatever I feel like on the day, honestly. But it is mostly music, I'd say, what I post. Until next time, losers, deuces.